I never thought I'd be telling this story, but life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. What happened to me 3 months ago changed everything I thought I knew about family, forgiveness, and second chances. The cold concrete of Penn Station had become my bed for the third night in a row. At 72 years old, I never imagined I'd be homeless. But here I was, clutching a torn shopping bag containing everything I owned in this world. My name is Eleanor Martinez, and I used to have a different life. A house in Queens, a small pension, and most importantly, a family. But pride, stubbornness, and a series of terrible decisions had stripped all of that away from me. It started 5 years ago when my daughter Maria tried to get me to move in with her family. "Mom, you can't live alone anymore," she'd said after I'd fallen and broken my wrist. "Come stay with us. The kids would love having Abuela around, but I was too proud, too independent. I'd raised 5 children as a single mother after my husband left us when Maria was just 10. I'd worked 3 jobs, kept food on the table, and put every one of my kids through school. I wasn't about to become a burden now. "I'm fine on my own," I'd insisted, pushing her away every time she tried to help. The irony wasn't lost on me now. Shivering on a bench in one of the busiest train stations in America, surrounded by thousands of people, but completely alone. The breaking point had come 6 months earlier. My pension got cut, my landlord raised the rent beyond what I could afford, and my pride prevented me from asking my children for help. By the time I swallowed that pride, it was too late. Maria had stopped answering my calls. My sons had their own families to worry about. I'd pushed them all away so effectively that when I finally reached out, they thought it was just another one of my independent phases. So there I was, invisible among the commuters, trying to make my meager savings last while figuring out my next move. The security guards had gotten used to seeing me around, and as long as I moved every few hours and didn't cause trouble, they let me be. That's when everything changed. It was around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when I felt someone gently shaking my shoulder. I'd learned to sleep lightly on the streets. You never knew who might be approaching with bad intentions. "Ma'am? Ma'am, are you okay?" I opened my eyes to see a young man in an expensive-looking coat crouched beside me. He had kind eyes and something familiar about his face that I couldn't quite place. "I'm fine," I said automatically, sitting up and pulling my thin jacket tighter around me, just waiting for my train. He glanced at the departure board, then back at me with a gentle smile. "At 2 a.m.? The next train to anywhere doesn't leave until 5:30. I didn't have an answer for that. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked softly. My stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, betraying the fact that I'd had nothing but vending machine crackers for the past 2 days. "Come on," he said, standing up. "There's a 24-hour diner 2 blocks from here. My treat." Every instinct told me not to trust strangers, especially at this hour. But something about this young man felt safe. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was that familiar quality I couldn't shake. "I don't need charity," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "It's not charity. It's Tuesday night, I can't sleep, and I hate eating alone. You'd actually be doing me a favor." Against my better judgment, I followed him out of the station. The diner was one of those old-school New York places with red vinyl booths and a menu that hadn't changed since 1975. He ordered coffee and pie. I tried to just get coffee, but he insisted I get a full meal. "I'm Marcus," he said as we waited for our food. "Eleanor," I replied, then added, "and I'm not usually... this is temporary." He nodded without judgment. We all go through tough times. As we talked, that nagging feeling of familiarity grew stronger. There was something about the way he tilted his head when he listened, the shape of his eyes, even his mannerisms that reminded me of someone. "Can I ask you something?" I finally said. "Have we met before? You seem so familiar." Marcus paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What's your last name?" "Martinez. Eleanor Martinez." The cup clattered against the saucer as he set it down, his eyes widening. "Martinez? From Queens? You had a daughter named Maria?" My heart stopped. "How do you know that?" "Because Maria Martinez is my mother," he said quietly. "You're my grandmother." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This successful-looking young man in the expensive coat was Maria's son? "My grandson? Marcus?" I whispered. Little Marcus, who used to build Lego castles on my kitchen table? He nodded, tears forming in his eyes. I can't believe it's you, Abuela. Mom told us she said you'd chosen to cut ties with the family. What? No, that's not. I tried calling, but no one answered. I thought you all hated me for being so stubborn. The truth came pouring out of both of us. After I'd pushed the family away for so long, they'd eventually stopped trying to reach out. When my phone got disconnected because I couldn't pay the bill, they assumed I'd changed my number and didn't want contact. Meanwhile, I thought they'd given up on me. Mom has been heartbroken for years, Marcus said. She blamed herself for not trying harder, and here you are, and I almost walked past you. But why were you at the station at 2 a.m.? I asked. He looked embarrassed. I'd been at a business dinner that ran late. I was waiting for an Uber when I saw someone on the bench who looked like they needed help. I never imagined it would be you. As we talked through the night, I learned that little Marcus had grown up to become incredibly successful. He'd started a tech company fresh out of MIT that developed apps for small businesses. The company had gone viral, been acquired by a major corporation, and made him wealthy beyond imagination. The crazy thing is, he said, I've been trying to find you for months. I hired private investigators, checked hospital records, contacted social services. I never thought to look in train stations. By the time the sun came up, we'd filled in 5 years of missing time. He told me about his success, his fiancée Jennifer, and how he'd always wondered about the grandmother who'd helped raise him. I told him about my pride, my mistakes, and how that pride had cost me everything. You're never going to be alone again, he said as we left the diner. I promise you that. What happened next felt like a fairy tale. Within a week, Marcus had set me up in a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side while he looked for something more permanent. The apartment was more luxurious than any place I'd ever lived. Marble countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of Central Park, and a doorman who called me Mrs. Martinez with genuine respect. This is too much, I protested as he showed me around. Abuela, I make more money than I know what to do with, he said. Let me take care of you. It's what family does. But that was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, he took me to see a house in Westchester County. Not just any house, a mansion. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a library, a sunroom, and a garden that took my breath away. Marcus, this is insane, I said as we walked through rooms bigger than my old entire apartment. You raised 5 kids in a tiny apartment in Queens, he replied. You worked 3 jobs to make sure we all had what we needed. You deserve to live like a queen, but I can't accept this. It's too much. He stopped walking and took my hands. Abuela, when I was 8 and Dad left, do you remember what you told me? I thought back to those dark days when Maria was struggling as a single mother, and I was helping however I could. I told you that family takes care of family no matter what. Exactly. So let me take care of you. The house came fully furnished with everything I could need. Marcus had even hired a housekeeper to come twice a week and a gardener to maintain the beautiful grounds. But the biggest surprise came the next day when he handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked. Open it. Inside was a cashier's check for $2 million. I nearly fainted. Marcus, I can't. This is impossible. No one needs this much money. It's yours, he said simply. Money I've set aside specifically for family. I've been saving it for when I found you, but what if I lose it? What if I make bad decisions? What if, then we'll figure it out together. But Abuela, you've earned the right to stop worrying about money. You've worried about it for 72 years. That's long enough. The next few months were the happiest I'd experienced in years. Maria and I had an emotional reunion, with both of us apologizing for the misunderstandings that had kept us apart. My other children came to visit, and suddenly I had a house full of grandchildren I barely knew, but who were eager to get to know their abuela. Marcus's fiancée, Jennifer, turned out to be a wonderful young woman who reminded me a lot of Maria at that age, smart, kind, and completely devoted to Marcus. She'd grown up without grandparents and was thrilled to have me in her life. I always wanted a grandmother to teach me family recipes, she said during one of our cooking sessions in my new kitchen. Well, you've got one now, I replied, showing her how to make the perfect sofrito. Marcus visited every Sunday for dinner. a tradition that reminded me of the old days when my house in Queens was always full of family. Sometimes he'd bring business associates or friends, and I loved playing the role of the gracious hostess in my beautiful home. I started volunteering at a local food bank, using my experience with hunger to help others who were struggling. I also began sponsoring families in need, something I never could have imagined doing just months earlier. For the first time in years, I felt useful, valued, and loved. But as the saying goes, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. It was a Tuesday afternoon in December when my perfect new life came crashing down. I was in the garden, checking on my winter roses, when I heard the doorbell ring. "I'll get it." "Mrs. Martinez," called Rosa, my housekeeper. A few minutes later, she appeared in the garden with a troubled expression. "There's a man here to see you. He says his name is Roberto Martinez, and that he's your husband." The pruning shears fell from my hands. Roberto, my husband who'd abandoned me and the children 45 years ago. The man who'd left us with nothing and never looked back. "Tell him I'm not here," I said quickly. "I already told him you were in the garden," Rosa said apologetically. Before I could respond, I heard footsteps on the stone path. I turned to see a man I barely recognized, older, grayer, wearing a cheap suit that had seen better days. But those eyes were the same. Those were the eyes that had once told me he loved me, and later the same eyes that had looked at me with indifference as he packed his bags. "Hello, Eleanor. What do you want?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk? Please?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to call security and have him removed from my property. But curiosity, and maybe something deeper, made me nod toward the patio furniture. We sat across from each other like strangers, which in many ways we were. "You look good," he said. "This is quite a place you have here." "What do you want, Roberto?" He sighed and looked older than his 75 years. "I heard about your grandson, about how successful he is, how he's taken care of you." My blood ran cold. "How did you hear about that?" "Word gets around. The Martinez family's Cinderella story. Homeless grandmother becomes millionaire overnight thanks to tech genius grandson. It's been in the local papers." I'd forgotten about the articles. Marcus had been so proud of our reunion that he'd done a few interviews about the importance of family and looking out for elderly relatives. The story had gotten picked up by several publications. "I'm dying, Eleanor." The words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever I'd been expecting him to say, it wasn't that. "I have maybe 6 months left. Lung cancer." 40 years of cigarettes finally caught up with me. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt vindicated. This was the man who destroyed my life. But another part, the part that had once loved him, felt a flicker of sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "But I still don't understand why you're here. I want to make amends. I want to try to fix what I broke. 45 years too late for that. I know. But Eleanor, I've been following your family from a distance all these years. I know what a good mother you were, what a good woman you are. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway." I stood up abruptly. "You need to leave. Please, just hear me out. I'm not asking for money, if that's what you're worried about. I'm not here to take advantage of your new situation." "Then what are you here for?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I'm here to give you this." Inside the envelope were documents I'd never seen before. Legal papers, bank statements, and a letter written in Roberto's handwriting. "What is this?" I asked, though my hands were shaking as I read. "It's the truth about why I left." The documents told a story I'd never known. In 1979, Roberto had gotten involved with some dangerous people. He'd borrowed money from loan sharks to try to save his failing construction business, thinking he could pay it back quickly. When the business collapsed anyway, he owed them more than he could ever repay. "They threatened you and the children," he said quietly. "They said if I didn't come up with the money, they'd hurt my family to send a message to other debtors." I looked up from the papers. "So you ran away? You left us with nothing?" "I left to protect you. They told me if I disappeared, they'd consider the debt settled. If I stayed, they'd make an example of my family. You could have told me. We could have figured something out together." "With what?" "We had nothing, Eleanor. Less than nothing. And these weren't the kind of people who negotiated. I made a choice to save your life and the children's lives even if it meant you'd hate me forever. The letter in the envelope was dated just days after he'd left. It explained everything, apologized for everything, and begged me to understand that he was doing it for us. At the bottom was an address where he'd be staying and a promise to find a way to send money as soon as he could. "I never got this letter," I whispered. "I never sent it. I wrote it 100 times, but I never sent it. I was too much of a coward." "So where have you been for 45 years? Working construction in Texas under a different name. Living in cheap apartments, eating beans and rice, and sending every dollar I could spare to a bank account I set up for you." He showed me more papers, decades of deposits to an account under my name that I'd never known existed. Small amounts at first, then larger ones as he got better jobs. Over the years, it had grown to nearly $200,000. "Why didn't you ever contact me about this account?" "Because I was afraid you'd refuse the money if you knew it came from me. And because I was ashamed. I destroyed our family. I broke promises. I let you struggle alone while I was building a new life, even if it was a lonely one." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process 4 decades of misunderstanding. "I'm not here for forgiveness," he continued. "I know I don't deserve it. I'm here because I'm dying, and I couldn't go to my grave knowing you thought I abandoned you because I didn't love you. Eleanor, leaving you and the children was the hardest thing I've ever done, but staying would have gotten you all killed." That night I couldn't sleep. Roberto was staying at a motel in town, and I'd promised to give him an answer about something. He hadn't actually asked for anything specific, but the implication was clear. He wanted back into my life, even if only for his remaining months. I called Marcus, needing to talk to someone I trusted. He just showed up. Marcus asked after I'd explained the situation, with documents, bank records, everything. "Marcus, there's an account with $200,000 in it that I never knew about. Money he's been sending for decades. And you believe his story?" That was the million-dollar question. The cynical part of me wondered if this was all an elaborate con. Roberto shows up just when I've come into money, conveniently with a sob story about sacrifice and secret bank accounts. But the documents looked real. The dates on the deposits matched what he'd told me, and there was something in his eyes, a weariness and regret that seemed too deep to fake. "I think I do," I said finally. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to tell him to get lost. He had 45 years to explain himself. But another part of me, Marcus, what if he's telling the truth? What if I spent all these years hating him for trying to protect us?" "What does your heart tell you?" My heart told me that the man who'd sat in my garden looked broken. Not greedy or manipulative, just broken. "I think I need to hear more of his story." "Then do that. But abuela, be careful. Don't let him take advantage of your kind heart." The next day, I drove to Roberto's motel. It was a far cry from my mansion in Westchester, a rundown place that charged by the week and had seen better decades. His room was sparse but clean. A few changes of clothes, some medications, and a stack of photographs on the nightstand. "Those are pictures of the grandchildren," he said, noticing my gaze. "I've been following their lives from a distance. School plays, graduations, weddings. I have a whole album of newspaper clippings about Marcus's success." I picked up one of the photos. It was Marcus at his college graduation, cut from a local newspaper. Roberto had been collecting these moments, building a shadow family album of the life he'd given up. "Tell me everything," I said, "from the beginning." What came out over the next several hours was a story more complex and heartbreaking than I'd imagined. Roberto had indeed gotten involved with loan sharks, but not just to save his business. Maria, our oldest, had been sick as a child. Chronic asthma that required expensive treatments our insurance wouldn't fully cover. The business was failing partly because Roberto kept taking time off to care for Maria or take her to doctor appointments. "You remember how bad her asthma was," he said. "She was in the hospital every few months. The bills were crushing us," I remembered. Those were terrifying years, watching our little girl struggle to breathe, not knowing if she'd make it through another attack. So I borrowed money to pay for her treatments and to keep the business afloat long enough to get back on our feet. But construction was slow that year, and I kept having to borrow more just to make the previous payments. The loan sharks had started with threats, then escalated to following our children home from school. They'd shown up at Maria's school, asking teachers about her schedule. The message was clear: pay up, or something might happen to the little girl with the breathing problems. That's when I knew I had to disappear. They told me if I left town and stayed gone, they'd consider the debt paid. If I stayed, they'd hurt you and the children to make an example. But why didn't you take us with you? Where? I had no money, no prospects, and no guarantee they wouldn't follow us. At least if I left alone, you had your job at the factory, the apartment, family support. If we all ran together, we'd have been homeless with 5 children and dangerous people hunting us. He'd spent the first year in Texas working under a false name, constantly looking over his shoulder. It wasn't until he'd heard through mutual friends that the loan sharks had been arrested in a federal raid that he felt safe enough to use his real identity again. By then, 2 years had passed. I figured you'd moved on, maybe found someone better, someone who wouldn't put his family in danger. So you just stayed away? I started the bank account in year 3. I told myself I was helping, even if you didn't know it. But really, I was being a coward. I was afraid to face what I'd done to our family. The most heartbreaking part was learning that he'd driven past our house in Queens every few years, just to see if we were okay. I saw you working in the garden once, about 10 years ago. You looked happy, content. I almost knocked on the door then, but one of the neighbors mentioned you were dating someone. I hadn't been dating anyone seriously, but I remembered being friendly with a widower from church around that time. I convinced myself you were better off without me. Over the following weeks, I found myself meeting Roberto regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just walking in the park near his motel. Slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild something, not our old relationship, but something new. Marcus was skeptical at first, but he agreed to meet Roberto. He's really dying? Marcus asked me afterward. The doctors confirmed it. Maybe 4 months now, not 6. And you believe his story? The bank records check out. I had a lawyer verify the account. It's real, and it's mine. The deposits match his story exactly. That doesn't mean everything else is true. No, but, Marcus, I've been angry for 45 years. I'm tired of being angry. The truth was, I could see my younger self in Roberto's impossible situation. A parent desperate to protect their children, making an awful choice because there were no good choices available. What do you want to do? Marcus asked. I want to bring him home. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Home? The house has 4 bedrooms. He's dying alone in a terrible motel room. Whatever he did or didn't do 45 years ago, no one should die alone. What will Mom say? That was the big question. Maria had been 8 when her father left. She remembered the struggle, the uncertainty, the nights I'd cried when I thought the children were asleep. But when I talked to her about it, her response surprised me. If you can forgive him, Mom, then I can try to understand him. You don't have to do this for me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I've learned some things about impossible choices since becoming a mother myself. And because Marcus is right, no one should die alone. So Roberto came to live in my mansion in Westchester. We set him up in the guest bedroom furthest from mine, with its own bathroom and sitting area. It wasn't a romantic reconciliation. Too much time had passed for that. But it was a chance for closure, for understanding, and maybe for peace. Roberto's presence in the house changed the dynamic of our reunited family, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of creating tension, it seemed to bring everyone closer together. He was a different man than the one who'd left in 1979. 45 years of loneliness and regret had humbled him. He was gentle with the grandchildren, respectful to Maria and my other children, and endlessly grateful for the chance to be part of the family again, even temporarily. I know I don't deserve this, he said one evening as we sat in the sunroom watching the sunset. But thank you for letting me come home to die. Everyone deserves to die with dignity, I replied. And surrounded by people who care about them. Do you care about me? After everything? It was a fair question, and one I'd been grappling with myself. I care about the man you were before life got complicated. And I care about the man you've become after all these years of carrying your guilt. The grandchildren were fascinated by their long-lost grandfather. He taught them card games and told them stories about their parents as children. Jennifer, in particular, seemed drawn to him. He reminds me of my own grandfather, she told me. The way he listens when you talk, like every word matters. Marcus remained cautious but cordial. One evening I found them talking quietly on the back patio. I would have made the same choice, I heard Marcus say. What choice? Roberto asked. If someone threatened Jennifer or our future children, I would have done whatever it took to keep them safe, even if it meant sacrificing myself. It wasn't supposed to be forever, Roberto said quietly. I thought I'd figure out a way to come back safely. But years turned into decades, and it got easier to stay away than to face what I'd done. The important thing is you're here now, watching them together, my grandson and the grandfather he'd never known. I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Our family was complete. As Roberto's health declined, he became determined to make amends in concrete ways. He signed over the secret bank account to me officially, but I had other plans for that money. I want to use it to help other families, I told him. Families facing impossible choices like we did. We established the Martinez Family Foundation, which would provide emergency financial assistance to families dealing with medical crises and predatory lending situations. Roberto was well enough to attend the first board meeting, held right there in our dining room. This is your real legacy, Maria told him afterward. Not the mistakes you made, but the help this will provide to other families. He also insisted on writing letters to each of his children and grandchildren, not asking for forgiveness, but explaining his actions and expressing his love and pride in the people they'd become. I want them to know that leaving them was the hardest thing I ever did, he told me as he sealed the envelopes. But watching them grow into such amazing people has been my greatest joy, even from a distance. The letter he wrote to Marcus was particularly moving. He thanked him for taking care of me when he couldn't, for being the man of the family he'd failed to be, and for giving an old man a chance at redemption. But perhaps the most meaningful thing Roberto did was something completely unexpected. Marcus and Jennifer had been planning a simple wedding for the spring, but as Roberto's condition worsened, they decided to move it up to Valentine's Day. We want Abuelo to be there, Marcus said, using the grandfather title Roberto had never heard applied to himself. The wedding was held in our sunroom, decorated with flowers from our garden. It was small, just family and close friends, but perfect. Roberto, despite being weak and requiring oxygen assistance, insisted on walking Jennifer down the aisle since her own father had passed away years earlier. It would be my honor, he said when she asked, tears in both their eyes, as I watched this frail man, who'd missed 45 years of family moments, proudly escort our grandson's bride down the makeshift aisle. I felt something shift in my heart. The last traces of anger and resentment simply melted away. After the ceremony, Roberto pulled me aside. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. What is it? I never stopped loving you. Not for one day in 45 years. Leaving you wasn't about not loving you. It was about loving you too much to let you get hurt because of my mistakes. I looked at this man who'd been my husband, my greatest source of pain, and now, strangely, a source of healing. I know, I said simply. And Roberto? I never stopped loving you either. I was just too angry to admit it. We didn't remarry. There wasn't time, and we were different people now. But we had something perhaps more valuable: understanding, forgiveness, and peace. Roberto passed away on a Tuesday morning in March, quietly in his sleep. I was holding his hand, and his last words were, "Thank you for letting me come home." The funeral was larger than I'd expected. People from his construction jobs in Texas flew in. Families who'd been helped by our foundation attended. But mostly, it was our family, children and grandchildren who'd barely known him but had grown to love. Him in his final months, Marcus, gave a beautiful eulogy about second chances and the importance of understanding that good people sometimes make terrible choices for good reasons. My grandfather taught me that it's never too late to try to make things right, he said, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is sacrifice, even when no one understands it at the time. After the funeral, I found myself in an unexpected position. I was grieving, but I was also at peace in a way I hadn't been for decades. The anger that had poisoned so much of my life was finally gone. Maria and I grew even closer, bonding over our shared experience of loving and forgiving a complicated man. My other children, who'd initially been skeptical of Roberto's return, admitted that seeing him die with dignity and surrounded by love had helped heal wounds they didn't even know they still carried. The foundation thrived, helping dozens of families in its first year. We heard from people who'd avoided predatory lenders because of our educational programs, families who'd gotten emergency assistance for medical bills, and children who'd been able to stay in school because we'd helped with housing costs. "This is Dad's real apology," Maria said, as we read through thank you letters from families we'd helped. "Every person we help is him saying, 'I'm sorry,' for the pain our family went through." 6 months after Roberto's death, I was cleaning out his room when I found a journal he'd kept during his final months. The entries were heartbreaking and beautiful, page after page of gratitude for the chance to know his grandchildren, wonder at the woman I'd become, and amazement at the family's capacity for forgiveness. One entry, written just weeks before he died, stood out. "I came back expecting to die alone and bitter, carrying 45 years of guilt and regret. Instead, I got to die surrounded by love, having finally told the truth and knowing that my family understood why I made the choice I did. Eleanor gave me the greatest gift anyone can give. She let me come home. Marcus gave me the gift of respect and acceptance. The children gave me the gift of forgiveness. I am the luckiest man who ever lived." Reading those words, I realized that Roberto's return hadn't just been about his redemption, it had been about mine too. I'd spent so many years defined by anger and abandonment that I'd forgotten who I was underneath all that pain. Forgiving him had allowed me to rediscover the woman I'd been before life got so complicated. Today, as I write this story, I'm sitting in the garden of the mansion Marcus bought me, surrounded by flowers Roberto planted in his final months. The house is frequently full of family, children, and grandchildren who now see it as the family gathering place Roberto and I never had the chance to create when we were young. The foundation has helped over 300 families, and we've established a scholarship program for children of single mothers. Marcus has expanded it nationally, using his business connections to set up chapters in 12 cities. But perhaps most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late for second chances, third chances, or even fourth chances. Life has a way of bringing things full circle when you least expect it. People often ask me if I regret the years of anger, if I wish Roberto had come back sooner, if I'm bitter about the time we lost. The answer is no. Those years of struggle made me strong. They taught me independence and resilience. They showed me I could survive anything. And when Roberto finally did come home, I was strong enough to choose forgiveness over bitterness, understanding over judgment. Marcus likes to say that our story proves money isn't the most valuable thing you can give someone. That love, forgiveness, and the chance for redemption are worth more than any fortune. He's right, of course. But I'd be lying if I said the money didn't help. The mansion gave Roberto a beautiful place to die. The financial security allowed me to focus on healing instead of survival. And the foundation gives our family a way to honor both our struggles and our blessings by helping others. Last week, I received a letter from a woman in Chicago whose family was helped by our foundation. Her husband had gotten involved with predatory lenders trying to pay for their daughter's cancer treatments. Instead of disappearing like Roberto did, he was able to get help from our emergency assistance program. The family stayed together, the daughter is in remission, and they're rebuilding their lives. "You saved my family," she wrote. "We didn't have to choose between love and safety." That letter is framed on my mantle now, next to a photo from Marcus and Jennifer's wedding showing Roberto proudly walking the bride down the aisle. Sometimes the best endings aren't the ones where everything works out perfectly. They're the ones where people find the courage to forgive, to understand, and to love despite the pain. My story isn't really about becoming wealthy overnight, though that certainly changed my circumstances. It's about the unexpected ways life can surprise you, about the power of family, and about how it's never too late to heal old wounds. I'm 73 now, living in luxury I never imagined possible, surrounded by a family that was broken but has been beautifully repaired. Roberto is gone, but his presence in our final months together healed something in all of us that we didn't even know was still bleeding. Marcus still comes for Sunday dinner every week, often bringing Jennifer and their new baby, a little girl they've named Elena after me. She's the first great-grandchild I've been able to hold from birth, and Roberto's great-granddaughter, though he never got to meet her. But I tell her stories about her great-grandfather, who loved his family so much he was willing to sacrifice everything to keep them safe. I tell her about second chances and forgiveness, and someday, when she's old enough to understand, I'll tell her about the night her grandfather found me sleeping in a train station and how that moment changed everything. The mansion isn't just a house anymore. It's a home filled with love, laughter, and the sound of children playing in rooms that Roberto helped design in his final months. The money isn't just numbers in a bank account. It's security, opportunity, and the ability to help other families facing impossible choices. But most importantly, I'm not just a survivor anymore. I'm not defined by abandonment or anger or the years I spent struggling alone. I'm Eleanor Martinez, grandmother, philanthropist, and living proof that it's never too late for love to find its way home. My story began with loss and anger, took me through poverty and despair, surprised me with wealth and reunion, and ended with forgiveness and peace. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I'd be living in a mansion, running a foundation, and grieving the loss of the husband who abandoned me, while also treasuring the time we had together at the end, I would have thought they were crazy. But life has a way of writing stories we never could have imagined. Mine just happened to begin in a train station with a young man who couldn't walk past someone who needed help. And that, I think, is the real moral of this story. We never know when our lives might change completely, when the past might knock on our door, or when we might get the chance to heal wounds we thought were permanent. But if we keep our hearts open to possibility, to forgiveness, and to love, sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives are still waiting to be written. Even at 73, I'm still writing mine.